On now.
All right. Well, welcome to the February 8th meeting of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. Mr. Glavy, would you be so kind as to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, the first item on our agenda is an overview that I think Mr. Glavy is able to give us, since he was at the Selectmen's meeting and is, as it were, has become one of the experts on this particular topic.
I specifically asked you to disclaim that.
No, in terms of compared to the rest of us.
I'll tell you what, because an update was given in public at the Selectmen meeting, and all of that information on the space needs assessment, both the executive version and I believe, all the detailed responses. Mara, do you happen to know if that's true or not? I know we asked that they all be put in there on the website, right? It's all on the town website. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We did get an update from the consultants that the town had hired. Little history there. We if you remember, if you were on a couple of years ago, the first time we attempted it, we appropriated an amount of money that was ill-advised, too small, and nobody bid, so we upped the amount, and we got we did get a competent assessment outfit, and they did their report for the town, which you've got the summary for, at least the PowerPoint for, summary from Lieb Architects, and long and short of it is the approach taken was to do the obvious, ask everybody what their current level of activity was, what their existing needs were, and what their anticipated needs were. This dealt not only with the very prominent departments that have expressed concern, and the town's very aware of their space needs, meaning the library, obviously, on one end of this building, and the Council on Aging on the other, but everybody else in between, all the various boards, and and that was pretty informative to find out that departments like the clerk's office and the rest of them are experiencing a lot of a lot of traffic, a lot of record-keeping responsibility, and the rest of it that has an increased level of activity that if you walk in, it's pretty evident to the eye that there's some space needs. And what the analysis will show is that this all leads to a variety of options that they presented to the towns. I think there were 3 options, which kind of included renovation on the existing site with the library on site and expansion out back, renovation on the existing site with a separate library out back, which allows offices to spread out inside, and then third, going off-site. And then so there's, and actually I think after the architects had done their work, the other town boards that had been involved had come up with an option 4, which really hasn't been vetted. It's kind of a I'll leave that alone, because it wasn't the product of the architect's work. We accepted the report, including some very preliminary bottom line costs, and if we do this, whether we do this in stages or at whatever level, it could cost upwards in the neighborhood of about $30 million of investment on the town in capital. Knowing that the library, we've already had their own analysis done from their own consultants that it would be to produce the project that they want out back, $14 million project, offset by prospective state funds at a certain amount. Not terribly surprising to hear that the big picture would be about $30 million. Now, that's if we do everything that's been proposed in very broad brush terms, and, you know, I think the best way to accept this is a good starting point to start analyzing each of the pieces individually, and in fact, that's the next step that the board decided to go with it, the Board of Selectmen, that is anyways, and that's to make sure that the biggest players in the, you know, affected by these kind of decisions, meaning the library and the Council on Aging, or, I'm sorry, yeah, Council on Aging, Park and Rec for that matter, would all be at the table reviewing this document and how it affects their own needs and kind of reviewing some of these options. I think it's very important to say that this was a 10,000 foot view of things, so I don't want people to get hung up on the numbers. I hate to be the person even mouthing them, you know. They're not my product, and I'm not sure, you know, without pointing, you know, without even putting doubt on it, I'm sure lead architects would agree that, you know, it is what it is. It's a needs analysis study estimate based on very little information. So it gives us a starting point. The details gathered from the surveys that they did of each department, I think, are a particular value, because then we can start studying on a case-by-case basis what individual departments are, and then determinations can be made. What's critical, what's you know, what's just wish list, and those sort of things. So there it is. If folks want the detail, I encourage them to go to the town's new and improved website, where all of this is there, both the executive summary, which we have before us now, as well as the full report with all the interviews done with the various departments.
Yeah, just let me just say that I also detected that certain departments, certain functions obviously have run out of space, others are running out of space.
Right.
But not everybody's suffering equally.
Right.
If you want to call it that. So that makes this a little bit, shall we say, definitely a first cut. And do you have, from your perspective, any suggestions for this group to either begin thinking about or take action or incorporate into other things that we're already doing?
I wasn't anticipating that question, but I'll say I'll state what it is perhaps obvious and maybe not obvious, is that we should maybe analyze this summary of the report or the whole report in light of what we already know from the master plan. I'm not sure to what extent Lead Architects looked at the master plan.
Sure.
But if we see commonalities or divergences, maybe we should prepare our own memo that speaks to that. Because if this is as it is, a product of asking departments what their perceived need is, and we have the benefit of knowing through the master plan process anyways, what the town's perceived wants are, then, you know, we might be able to contribute something in terms of helping the town define, you know, what we do and what we don't do.
Fair enough.
Paul, I have a quick question. So it looks like the PMBC, the
Permanent Municipal Building Committee, yep.
yes, was the group that essentially put out the RFP a year ago, and what's their kind of ongoing role in this whole process?
To be determined. In fact, they were involved in it, but our procurement officer, who was in charge of that process, was the Assistant Town Administrator, Anthony Ansaldi, and my points of contact were our two board members who were involved in this process. One was Joe Knox, I think the other was Chuck DeCoste, right? Is that right, Chuck and Joe?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we didn't have a lot of direct interaction with the Permanent Municipal Building Committee, but they have been the keeper of, you know, all the documents on past activity, and they have been the overseers of past construction projects. So I think that was why they were involved in that. But I was not a direct participant in that process, so I don't know. And nobody has assigned them any duties going forward on that.
Okay, thanks.
Interesting. Are there any other comments? Okay, I'm going to take it on, and of course, if anybody wants to help, I'll be perfectly willing to look at this, which I already started, in view of the master plan and how it fits in. And already I can tell you there are some relationships, they're not trivial, and they don't necessarily solve the problem, they just put a slightly different slant on it and how you look at it. And so I think that your point is well taken. We're at the beginning of something as opposed
Yeah.
to, this is the beginning of the beginning, unfortunately. It's,
I would encourage a review, and if you want to, you know, and I'll take this as a way of getting myself off the hook, since I already have a seat at the table at that discussion from the selectman level,
Yeah.
I would prefer, frankly, that the Master Plan Implementation Committee's review of this document be, you know, conducted by a subcommittee other than myself, so that we're getting, you know, new eyes looking at it.
Well, and I brought up the PMBC question because from a liaison standpoint, I'm their liaison, and I was all prepared to go and present to them last night, but we got shut down due to the storm.
Wow.
So I think if there is a subcommittee that takes a look at that, I would definitely like to be on that.
Okay, so I tell you what, why don't you join me in the look at? Is there anybody else would like to either supplant me or
Jonathan, it'll be fun
participate?
If you get beyond two, you have to start posting meetings, so.
Oh, okay, okay, so the two of us will undertake it. We have enough to keep us busy at the moment. So that's what we'll do. Ann and I will undertake a look at the building space assessment, space needs assessment, and
In light of the master plan, right?
and connect it in light of and in connection in regard to the master plan. Okay, there's no further discussion. I don't think we need to have a vote on the two-person committee, but if you'd like to have one, I don't think it's necessary. I think we're about ready to report on the result of the subcommittee on screening proposals. And I'm pleased to report that we have met. It was a very productive meeting, and there are 3 proposals. We received 5, and of the 5, 3 of them emerged as clear candidates worthy of further consideration, and come in interviews and the rest of the process that follows. So the next step for the committee as a whole is to come up with the questions. As you know, all the questions must be exactly the same for each of them, and present those questions, keep an eye
And
on
again,
the ball.
that's by state procurement law.
Yeah,
Right,
all this
right,
is,
right.
all this is regulated. We've got to do it this way. In fact, the number of proposals that we have to bring to the whole committee's attention by law requires a minimum of 3.
Yeah.
So we have the 3. That was pretty straightforward to get the 3.
Now, if I remember correctly, and for our viewing audience, our subcommittee that was working with it was yourself, Anna, and
And-
Mike, is that right?
And
No,
John
oh.
Saliba, the 3 of us. And
Okay, all right.
And before I go further, I
Met
want-
twice.
Okay,
We met twice.
yeah,
Well, we met twice, but the process we followed, we did meet, we set up the process, which, by the way, resembles the process the entire committee would follow.
Right.
We use the standard that has been established of evaluating against, on the basis of being what degree advantageous in relation to the RFP and how connected it was to the RFP. And the first meeting was process, and we began testing slight variations of it, and very quickly came to the conclusion of the best way for the 3 of us to do it. And we decided that it would be best if we each took all the proposals to the quiet of our study and meet the following day. It turned out that we didn't meet the following day because the offices were closed, but that was a blessing in disguise, because it gave everybody a chance to, in the quiet of their study, to really do a job. And I have to say that the reviews were thorough and broad. I mean, they were really quite thorough. We probably know more about these than we ever wanted to know, and I'm very pleased with the outcome. So the 3 that we're going to visit, if it's nothing stop us, I'm going to, in no particular order, by
Can
the
I
way.
just ask one more question about, without prejudicing the process to come? I'm curious, any surprises why it was 5? Is that like, okay, that was a reasonable number? Were there others that were potential applicants you expected we didn't get, the ones that didn't come through? What were some of the distinguishing factors?
I wanted 10.
Yeah, right,
Okay,
yeah.
because I come from a world of multiples.
I mean, did it ever come across, was it money, or what, I was just curious, for future efforts, what do we, I mean, maybe 5 is fine, maybe there's only 5 outfits out there that look at a town like Littleton's.
I think we only got
Yeah.
5 for the master plan itself in the first place.
Yeah, that's a good point, Gary, yeah, okay,
And that was a bigger dollar value.
yeah,
So-
okay, so the pool out there is just, it is what it is, right?
I think I think you hit it. I think if Littleton had, shall we say, the appearance or the reputation of spending more, doing more, I think we would attract, maybe not with the same effect, because we still might get 5, but I think we would attract a slightly different, the folks who are missing from this are the larger companies. The larger companies who operate nationally or internationally. We have an exception. You'll see in one of the, we do have one of the candidates happens to be an exception, but that was just the way it worked out. But by and large, what was missing were people, large corporations that do consulting and engineering in multiple disciplines. And it would have been very nice, for example, to have that combination for this particular job, not necessarily because we wanted the engineering necessarily, but because of that background that would stand there. That, to some extent, didn't happen. So that was it. The other thing, too, is that this is not really, even though it was labeled a planning document, it really isn't a planning document. And I think that it fell into that gap. And that's also financial, or how much, how much Littleton would put out in order to spend on this. It's a difference between planning and implementing. I think people are quite willing to do the zoning part, but the other parts are required where you're starting to put significant costs on to, or trying to understand the costs and their significance. That's a somewhat different level of activity. And I don't think the companies that do that come in at the hourly level that we're prepared to pay. And I think that we're right in that gap.
Is this on more of the economic analysis, projections, that sort of thing?
Yes, it's made difficult, and this is not an excuse, it's just a fact, that because we're small,
Right.
in order to get the data to do that kind of stuff, the real data, to get it to that level, you have to spend a lot of time and money
Right.
on it. Our budget, I don't know how you cut it, very few towns can afford to do it. And even the towns that can afford to do it, it's really tough. So the ability to carry out what I would call granular economic impact analysis of the type that would, shall we say, not depend on the ground surveys, they're expensive. So I think that's why I meant we fell right in between the gap. I think if our population were, closer to, let's say, 12,000 or 15,000, we would attract a slightly different
Right.
quality. work.
That being said, collectively, you're all happy with the
Yeah, we would-
respondent pool and especially with the 3 finalists?
Yeah, I think I don't think.
Yeah.
I was quite happy with the ones that we got. We did get a variety. I mean, while they weren't, maybe we didn't get some of the big firms, one of the ones that we're recommending is a quite large firm, another one is a fairly large firm, and the other one is a smaller firm. So, so we did get a.
That same dynamic with the
Variety.
sewer process thing, yeah.
Yeah, but we were asking for a variety of work, from the architectural
Right.
work to the zoning to the economic analysis. They are distinct skill sets, and so finding an entity or a coalition, if you will, of entities coming together to do this work is really part of what we were looking for.
Yeah.
To make sure that it was all going to get covered well.
Good.
The other thing I would comment too is that in contacting what are considered to be some of the better economic impact analysis firms around the country, I can tell you most of them, because of the way they operate and the ones that have the reputation well-founded, they work on a sole source basis. In other words, they don't write proposals. And they basically get invited in, or they're hired directly simply because they're so fantastic. Okay. And so they would not necessarily, they would only come in if one of the contractors here decided they need to hire them. And that would be, an impact on our price, I would suspect. They may propose to do it, I don't know.
Well, if you guys are happy with 3 of them, that's good.
Well, I mean, fortunately for us, the three that did apply, they did such a job, it made it.
Five applied. you said.
Five applied,
Yeah,
but of the three that survived, there was very little, shall we say, difference of opinion, as it were.
That's good. Okay.
Any other questions? I'll be very happy to,
What are the firms?
I'm going to be handing out to you right now the,
Okay.
hopefully without prejudice. There's no significance to the order in which you receive them, all right? Just want to tell you.
Thank you.
Where's the? Nope. What happened?
I picked up yellow paper.
No, it's okay.
Mine is the.
Am I missing one?
Yeah, I was gonna say, it looked like two of the same one
Oh, I'm
here.
sorry, I may have handed you.
There it is.
Well,
Here we go,
well-
here we go,
I'll trade you.
here we go. Here, trade them out. I gave you duplicates of one of them.
well, these aren't necessarily duplicates, but they're both referencing Fort Point. Is that the,
What pond?
no, Fort Point, yeah. Which is,
Okay. You fooled me, that's what you
Yes,
did.
I did.
Okay,
There was I copied the cover separately.
that's okay. So you guys are loaded for bear.
well, no, now I'm down to two.
Okay, you're missing, what are you missing?
Harriman.
I lost, no, I got my Harriman, I got my Stantec. I do not have either one of the versions of the
Fort
Fort
Pond.
Point. Not, you keep saying Fort Pond.
I know what Fort Pond.
Yeah. Fort Point is UMass Boston. Never have my laugh.
Yeah, the only, make sure that Mark and Mike have copies. Cool. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So, are there any other additional questions or comments that you have over either the process, how we arrived here? I am going to bias you in the sense that don't be impressed necessarily one way or the other by the size of the proposal. Don't let that fool you.
Feels like an A? Don't, no?
Yeah, whatever you do, just because there's lots of pages, it didn't influence us, there's no reason it should influence
We didn't put a
you.
page limit on the proposal?
What?
We didn't put a page limit on the RFP?
We tried,
I
but.
like
we
putting page limits on RFPs.
Well, well, not this time, not this time.
Next time, Gary.
Unfortunately, having only 5 of them made it
Right.
easier. If we had 100,
Okay.
then we would have liked page limits.
In the process of going through the exercise, it became clear, I think, to the subcommittee, as I'm sure it's been very evident to everyone on this committee, as well as folks in town, that moving forward in the common requires not just a partnership between property owners and the town with respect to the waste management system that's being looked at, but everything else, including changing the zoning, encouraging development. This has more of an interactive component to it, and I consider it part and parcel of implementing the plan. It's not a plan, it's it's actually doing it. And one of the things that became, I don't know if this is going to be new or difficult or hard for the town to get used to, but we have to look at the businesses that are here as our partners, but also make them even better partners. What can we do to make it even more effective relationship than it currently exists? And in this connection, the other piece is also who we are as a committee. I think that unfortunately the name of the proposal included the word, plan in it. This is not, what we're doing here is, we're not carrying out a planning exercise. We're actually seeking where to make changes and to make those changes in zoning. And we're here to make decisions. That is what I say, I
Sure,
mean,
that came
the
out in the interview process. That,
Yeah.
the plan's been done.
Yeah,
Right.
and one of the things that, of course, is very tempting is when the master plan, is to redo the master plan without realizing you're reinventing the wheel.
Right.
And I'd like to say that we tried as a subcommittee to make sure as much as we could, given the circumstances, that the invention that we're not necessarily going to reinvent the wheel. We've already done a lot of it, there's a lot of information there, we don't have to go back to square one. There are certain kinds of data that do need to be collected, but you'd expect that. These were things that were not included in the master plan, but are here, but you need it in order to move forward.
Well, I mean, I think there is a plan element to the common piece. I mean, yeah, the zoning piece is pretty much of a diagnostics and like a prescription. Like, take the temperature, tell you what's wrong, and here's a medicine. But the plan part, I mean, I do see, we have those schemes in the wall, but we don't really have, we have some ideas that were floated in the master plan. So I mean, I do think there's gonna be a plan element to the common that is part of what we're looking to get. Am I correct?
Not quite, not
Can I
quite.
find a compromise between you both? It's a plan for implementing the vision. The vision's already been planned for. The specific steps still have to be planned for.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of adjectives that we can describe of what we want in the common. But there's a lot of different alternatives. I think there's still plenty of alternatives as to how it looks and what's done there. So, I don't think we have, I think we just have a wish list of things we want to do there without necessarily having specifically, I would say, a consensus as to how exactly it's going to look.
Okay,
So I think that needs to be gotten to, and then the follow-on to that is like, okay, this is what we all think we want to do, and then what are the steps we need to do to actually do it? Whether it's land acquisition or easements or zoning requirements or anything else, those kind of things. So I think it's a combo.
the we fortunately here is a different we than for anything else in town, and that is it's private property.
Sure.
And those, the folks who have that, who have that property, have to be brought into, they're going to shape it, they're going to try to shape it for their needs and their requirements, as much as let's say, I hope that we try to shape it for our needs.
Yes.
And somewhere in that partnership will emerge a revitalized common.
Right, so it's a combination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the
And I
plan-
think what we
Yeah.
saw
Yeah.
in the reports, the proposals that we liked, were that the people that we favored saw that and saw that combination of things as the crucial thing that had to be looked at. So,
It's not a blank piece of paper. We have to work with what's entrenched there and what's established there.
yeah,
And if necessary, change old habits. In other words, if folks are not used to thinking about the common in a certain way, and who knows, how that will work, part of it's changing people's perception about what is possible and what isn't. And, it's not just zoning, it's also the waste management system and other, shall we say, infrastructure changes.
Yes.
And by the way, the timeline on revitalization is not the lifetime of this consulting operation. The revitalization is going to probably take years,
Oh, yeah, sure.
and it's going to take a lot more work than I think a 7-person or even a 10-person committee can undertake.
Yep.
So Gary, when you review the documents, I think that you will find what you're seeking is in here.
Okay.
I do feel confident in that.
Okay, that's good. It's exciting.
Okay, so. Okay,
next step.
so the homework that you've got is obviously, please read carefully, go over the documents in front of you. And your job here is not to re-rate them, okay? Your job is to view them and to pose questions across the board, questions that get at things that you feel are either missing, why are they missing, and how you ask that question is strictly up to you. Strengths. You may want more detail than perhaps is provided. If that's true for all three, then that question should be there.
But again, we are obligated to ask the same questions of each of them.
Absolutely.
and we've been thinking about, we were talking about sort of the ways we could ask questions that would relate to all of them and would be useful, and the answers would be useful for understanding all of them, and I think that's,
And the part the part that's most difficult, and that's not a complaint, it's just a fact, it's the part that's very, very important, yet doesn't always emerge clearly in the proposals and sometimes in the question and answer sessions, has to do with what this relationship is between the folks who are working for us and the town. The interface between how they're managed by the town, how they manage their team, how well do they stick to schedules, how well do they stick to budgets. It's basically the part that you can't detect until you actually almost start the work, is what's going on between you and the consulting operation. So the interview time is more than, here are 9 questions. I'm very interested in attitudes, how they view this, how they think about the town, how much hands-off or hands-on they feel they want to be. That comes through the questions.
How are we doing anything with regards to references?
Yes. I think that we could either start the reference scan now. However, I think the best time to do it, and the committee can decide when they want to start collecting references, we could do it after we've had a chance to complete the question and answer period.
Do we have a set standard as to how many references we seek for each candidate?
I don't think,
I don't know why 3 just pops into my mind, if that's just,
yeah,
It's a matter of time.
right. Right, and the questions that
here's
you
the
want to
number,
ask
the
the
number shall be
references.
3.
Yeah.
So are we to come up with the questions to ask the references as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry?
There will be a few standard questions that you'd want to ask, how, did your project come in on time or under budget, or?
There's standard stuff that you can ask. The question is, when do we start when do we start talking to the references that they've already provided in the proposals? I think all of them, if I remember correctly,
Yes.
provided references.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't hesitate for a moment to start calling and making contact with folks ahead of the question and answer period, if nothing else, to prepare.
But we should structure that, it'll either you or
Yeah, I
or
got
somebody
it.
designated should do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I find you don't even, I mean, I find a questionnaire of some kind that, we're all working off, that you're working off of all this same questions, for consistency.
What we call references, are you talking about calling references or questioning?
References. References.
Okay,
To have standard questions you want to
Yeah,
ask that are
that's-
consistent amongst them. I mean, I think they can vary a little bit, but for the most part, you want to work off generally a script. I find it for consistency purposes.
Script, yes, but a
Yeah.
form, no. A form gives them the opportunity to go right back to say to the client and say, how do you want it filled out?
That's fine. That's
I'd rather have somebody having a conversation with them.
That's fine.
That's
fine.
I mean, there's certain fundamental, but the proposals and the nature of the proposals are different enough, and the experiences are different enough, that actually, that it may be not necessarily difficult, but in some cases, there are certain questions that need to be asked of one
Sure.
of these proposals that I would not ask of another.
That's fair.
But the nature of what's in that question is pretty much, obviously going to be the same. But it's basically.
It's a mix. Some are going to be
mix,
fairly
yeah.
consistent, like Marion was saying, some of the standard type questions you're going to ask. That it's not going to be in a proposal, because it's not going to talk about budget schedule. That's more of the dynamics of the interaction of working with somebody is going to come out of the references versus.
That's going to help. That's going to help.
So that's what I'm
So-
saying. I think it's a
so
combination of
that's-
some
so
standard
that's-
type ones, and then there's going to be some that,
Right.
hey, I'm intrigued by, I'm wondering about that one, so you might have some questions.
In view of that, I want to make the following suggestion, and the workload is precisely the same. My suggestion is that we have them that all 3 are going to be invited in for questions. Okay, anyway, all right? So my suggestion is that we wait for those questions to be completed, and then we start calling the references. I'd like to get some
one of those
feedback on that.
Wait for the questions to be, for the.
All right, we
Get to the
propose,
interview phase first.
we propose questions for the interview, to direct the committee interview of the vendors, okay? So we have a list of questions, whether it's 9, 10, or 15. Those are standard for everybody.
Yep.
We rank them, 1, 2, 3, okay? We're going to rank them in order. At that point, it may be worthwhile then to start querying the references. Or would you prefer we query the references before they come into question? It's very simple.
I've done it both ways.
Yep.
Right.
That's why I'm trying to get the sense of, because the level of work and effort required is the same.
Sight unseen, I can't anticipate any reason that I'd need to know the reference information until I see them with my own eyes. I'd kind of like to see them with my own eyes first and then follow
Okay.
through on the, that's my preference, but I could go either way.
Okay, so you would like to wait until after the question and answer period?
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm fine with that, too. I mean, I think these firms, my presumption is that the firms are generally going to be good, and that references sometimes bring out, like, avoid, stay away, type of things. They don't usually help somebody up often finds. I find that they eliminate people. So I'm assuming that generally I'm assuming they're probably good, and then after you go through the interview phase, and then you do the references, it's confirmation that, yeah, there's no skeletons in the closet we need to be concerned about.
well, your experience has been far more positive. Okay, what do you think?
Well, honestly, I could go either way, but I think from the perspective of time, being able to interview them first and then going through and talking to their references, that's
Okay.
typically what I'm used to.
I have no particular preference, but it looks like most of you guys want to do it after the Q&A, that's fine with me.
Okay, fine, then let's do it that way.
Okay.
Okay, so the next thing that we'll start the process then. So the next thing is your reading of this and the formulation of the questions. How many questions and how soon does your homework have to be completed? When's our next scheduled meeting?
You don't, that's a very good question. I don't have another one listed.
Okay.
And I'm going to push to ask when the interviews would be scheduled as well, 'cause those will take some time to get settled.
So you want to start with, you want to work backwards from when we want to have
Well,
the
I
interviews?
get both of those scheduled, the next meeting and the interviews.
Well,
So the next meeting is where we develop the questions, and then the interviews will be after that.
Yeah.
so the week of the 26th, I mean, that's still 2.5 weeks away. I'm wondering if we can fit everybody into that Wednesday of that week.
well, that's where we'd be going over the questions, right? That is,
Yeah.
the interviews are 2 meetings away, correct?
Well,
Or not?
Well-
unless you designate somebody to collect and screen and.
I'm not opposed to that.
Doing the first hour, have them come in at 8 and we start at 7 or something like that with developing the questions, is that what you're saying?
No, I wouldn't try to do that all at once.
Okay.
I would say just have, rather than a subcommittee, just a couple people to,
Oh, okay.
to gather.
Funnel all our information in, we could confirm that, we wouldn't want to do that by email, but we could confirm that at the beginning of the meeting, what our questions were, if we've submitted them in advance.
Yeah, that would be the idea. I'm trying to get your questions in and then have the list
Yeah.
made up.
Well, then the week of the 26th, why not? Let's sooner rather than later, yeah.
So we'll have a meeting on that week, and at that point, by that point, we will have all come up with questions, and we'll have submitted them to somebody or other, and the questionnaire will be devised, or we'll decide on the questionnaire at that time. I could see us
I think we
doing
need to
either
talk
way.
through the questions.
Yeah, I think we ought to collect the questions and make sure everybody sees everybody's questions and
Right.
get the
It might
best
be,
ones
might
out.
be- might be
Yeah.
duplicate and,
Yeah.
Well, if that's the
Wordsmithing
case,
them.
then, yeah, something the week of the 26th then is
That's-
another
yeah.
sit-down meeting like this.
Yep.
then. Okay.
I think it's
So we can
important
distribute all the questions to everybody, but we can't discuss them, as
until
I
we come to the
understand,
meeting.
until we come to the
Till
meeting.
we come to the meeting, that's right.
Rather than just assuming that okay, say we meet the 26th, or that week, rather, to hash out the questions, anticipating that we'll resolve it at that night, well, why don't we just have another meeting that week to do the interviews? Otherwise, we're, putting it off another week, 2 weeks, whatever,
Yep.
If we can't do it in the same night, do it in 2 consecutive nights or something. Just
Do
an
we have
idea.
the slots open?
Let's see, I had, suggested, just to you, that we have interviews on February 28th, which is a Wednesday, but then we'd have to add another meeting sometime between now and then to do the questions.
Why don't we meet on the 27th and the 28th, no?
Tuesday and a Wednesday?
Yeah. As long as we have a room where we can,
I mean, I wasn't opposed to the idea of doing them both at the same night, but I understand that it presumes that we would reach consensus without pushing up against the deadline, of a scheduled interview.
all right, so we have the dates, right? Okay, all right. Now, how many questions should you produce? That's the next question. Okay,
Are we set on those? I'm
That's up
I'm
to
not
you guys.
available on Tuesday.
Well, let's change it then. Let's do it when we can do it.
Okay, well, we had set aside the 14th next Wednesday.
okay,
That got pushed for this meeting.
okay. So in other words, do you feel, does anyone here feel they can't generate questions by the 14th?
Or next Thursday's the 15th.
Yeah, I can generate questions, but I have conflicts on both the 14th and 15th. I can just generate my questions and not be here. That's fine. I mean,
Okay.
as long as you have a consensus.
Well, it's
Quorum, rather.
it's selecting and incorporating into the list, into the master
Yeah.
list for distribution.
Let's see.
Yeah, then we get the Historical Commission maybe meeting on the 14th, because we were supposed to meet yesterday.
Is it sad that,
Is
is
there
it
any-
sad that nobody's mentioning that that's Valentine's
Yes, we
Day?
know that, yeah.
Or a good
Maybe we
sign,
should-
finally, after all these
Maybe we
years.
Maybe we just,
Hi, Anthony.
maybe we just shouldn't meet on that
All right.
day.
People have been married for a while.
Is there, all right, the screening and selection of the questions should be done by the committee as a whole. Is that the sentiment here?
It would be desirable to
I think
to
so.
get through those, yes.
All right, then, folks, we're going to have to find a time when we all can get in the room together.
Yeah, well, what was the 15th you thought would be a conflict for you? Well, I've got I have the Economic Development Committee's on one of those nights, so 15th, maybe 16th.
Yeah, 15th is a conflict for me, too.
15th is, I'd like to avoid if I can.
Well, you guys really secretly celebrating Valentine's Day.
Should I say the 14th is a conflict for you too?
No, the 14th, I'm fine. We do nothing. I do nothing on Valentine's Day.
All right, so the 14th and the 15th don't work, is that?
Okay, 21st is the following Wednesday. 22nd won't work, we've got a planning board meeting and board.
That's
select-
February vacation week, just
It
FYI.
is.
So,
Yeah, we're out of town.
Okay, so looks
Yeah,
like
I'm
we
out
are
of
back
town
to
the
back
first week
on
in
the
March, but
27th,
whatever.
28th.
So we're back to the 27th and 28th? Wow.
Well, does it have to be the 20, who had a problem with the 27th? Somebody did, no.
What about the
but
26th?
yeah, I can make it happen.
Well, what
I
about
can make
the
27th
28th and the 1st? Is that a
I can do
possibility?
the 27th.
First is not,
First
It's
is the
not, that's a
planning board
planning
meeting.
board?
I can do the 27th.
All right, the 27th is it? We're all set?
Yeah, I can do it.
27th?
I can do it.
All right.
27th, 28th, is that what we're looking at now?
27th.
Okay.
now I'm gonna throw another wrench into it. If not all consultants are available on the 28th, do you want to open up a second date on March 7th?
I won't be around that week.
That would be unfortunate, not to have everybody.
Yeah,
We
no,
need-
well,
we need to-
come to Barbados and I'll be happy to interview them there.
Location of the interviews has been
Yes,
changed.
right.
If we, let's go with hopefully that we've given them enough notice that they can make the 28th. And maybe we can send an email out and see if we have to do something else.
Yeah,
To the vendors?
yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
yeah. Yeah, and if I recall for the master plan, we had one ask if there was an alternative date
Yeah.
because one of the players wasn't gonna,
Someone's out of country.
yeah, be able to attend that
So they
date.
had to
But
fill in,
they
come in.
put together the team without that person
Yeah.
and
And
did
If we have to reschedule, if I remember my open meeting law correctly, one of the few things you can do outside of a meeting is
Schedules.
scheduling, right?
Yes.
So we can do
All
that
right.
deliberately.
So let's do the 27th, 28th sequence and see
Great.
how much we can get done.
Okay.
Good.
Oh, very good,
That was good.
And then, Mr. Chairman, did we, I know we touched on it, but were we looking for, is there a target of how many questions?
I'm getting to that. Now that we've got the whole process here, I'm going to suggest, let me just see, for the master plan, I think we had 9 or 10. 8.
I see 8 here, but.
8. All right. I'm going to put on here 10.
Well, that's how many we want to end up with. How many should each of us, I'd like to self-impose limits on each of us individually, myself included.
Well, I mean, I think it's very likely that we're gonna have some of the same
Sure,
questions.
right.
So I
Yeah.
think if we each come up with like 3, then we'll probably,
3 to 5, let's go with 4. How about that? I propose a compromise.
Always a
Well, this-
mediator.
All right, let's put it this way.
just
You're
wanna
making the assumption
Move
that
things along.
Okay, okay. So we're going to each come up with 4 questions in the hope that we all don't ask the same four questions.
And that we end up with 10, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure there'll be enough differences.
I hope so.
We have
Okay.
enough of a difference mix in
That's
this
right.
group, I think we'll come up
Okay.
with some.
Well, we could
Especially
even,
if we share them, then we can see that, you know?
we could even sort of say a few things now that might get us thinking to, we want one question about something, I think something to do with the team and the personnel and the people who are going to be involved in it. Some question about their conception of what they're going to come up with. Some question about previous experience doing things. So, I mean, if we just put some things in each of those categories, we'll come up with enough that'll be.
Well, that's what the idea was.
Demonstrate your capability to do
Yeah.
the disparate parts of our request, you
Yeah,
know?
that was the idea of handing out the sample, which I think you saw.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was the idea of handing out the sample to stimulate that kind
Right.
of thinking,
So we don't wind up all asking about personnel and then nobody asks about the.
correct. So, the other idea I had was to give some of us specialists a chance to ask questions or to do things in particular areas. There happen to be, generally should be 7 of us, but, and it turns out that there are, I'm not sure this number matches perfectly, but I think there's 7 categories within the RFP. Okay? So, and we don't have to stick to this, but one idea would be to, if you're interested, is specialize in a particular area of questioning. If you prefer not.
Yeah, I prefer not.
I'm sorry?
I would prefer not.
You want to range over, you want a free chicken range. Okay, fair enough. I'm not going to impose, no reason to impose that kind of discipline, but.
And what I try to get out of the interviews is, I'm less concerned about the experience. I would sure hope that the experience is relatively captured in the proposals. I really want to know about the pragmatic elements of how they're going to do this and how they're going to, their approach. That's what I want to be focusing on.
Well, I don't know if you were present for the question and answer of this. The only reason I'm mentioning this is there may be instances, I'm not sure if it applies to all 3 of the vendors that we hope to invite in, but when you put together a team, the way the team behaves during the questions is far more revealing than anything in these books.
Oh, yes, that's true.
And if you ask them the question, it's very interesting to see what you get. It's not going to be in these proposals. And,
Yeah, there's a nonverbal element to this, for sure.
I'm sorry?
There's a nonverbal element to this.
Oh, it becomes very verbal when you see
The dynamics of
when
how
they
they
can't
work.
answer the question. Did you remember?
I do. I
Okay,
do,
fair
now
enough,
that-
all
that
right.
you
So
mention
anyway,
it.
all right, so we're doing the free-range chicken.
Okay, and for the interviews, I'll ask them to prepare what we did before, set aside 1 hour for each of them.
That's correct.
So start time is what works for you. Anna had suggested if we could start early at 5. Is that too early for people to?
Well, especially if we
5:30.
actually plan to deliberate afterward.
Right.
And we're using 3 of those hours just for the interviews themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
So we'll set a start time, leave 1 hour for each. How long do you want for a presentation, and how long do you want for questions and answers? Maybe 15, 20 minutes for presentation?
Yeah.
Same,
20 minutes max for presentation.
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, so they present as well?
Oh, yeah.
yeah, oh, yeah. How are you gonna, and that'll be the big question, how were you gonna approach the project with Littleton? Tell us about yourself and,
They should know how to do a presentation
Yeah.
without being given instruction on the proposal.
yeah.
And yeah, And
Did we feed them the questions ahead of time last
No.
time?
No.
We decided not to, right?
As a matter of
It's off
fact,
the
we
cuff.
locked out the other two so
but-
they wouldn't hear the answers.
They would be foolish not to hop on the internet and watch these meetings, and
before?
they'll know the questions before they walk in the door if they're not.
Well, you'd be surprised. Okay, so-
But they'll have a general idea, they've done this enough, they know what you're gonna be interested in.
They could've
Email
watched
the
the meeting
instructions for
before.
executive
Yeah,
session,
right.
all right?
Doesn't cover this.
Okay.
Only personnel matters.
Well, this is a personnel matter.
No.
I know what you mean, yeah, I know what you mean. All right, so we're going to come up with 4 questions apiece, and hope that they don't overlap too much, and that's going to be used for the question and answer period that follows a presentation.
You can come up with more.
Just, you're out of order. So anyway, so is there any further additions or observations you want to make about our process here? Is there anything that you think we should add to our process?
I do think I think it is helpful for consistency for the firms to have, you know, what it is they want them to talk on. You know, I know you said they should know what to do, but, I mean, just the highlights, okay, give me a recap of your experience, give me a recap of, you know, a project you think is the most relevant or something like that, or, you know, your team, and then also, why should we pick you?
But Gary, back to what you said earlier, if they've provided the team stuff, maybe the question should be, use your time to explain how you intend to fulfill the request we've made in the proposal.
That's my point, so if we even say, show up and do a presentation for 20 minutes, I mean.
No, but
Okay, all right.
Some direction, I think.
if they
is appropriate.
choose to focus on their team dynamics, that's fine, but we've got that. But I just say, how do you intend to implement our proposals?
Okay, I think we're both saying the same thing. Let me suggest a way to articulate it to them, that they might understand it. Lay out how various members of your team, okay, in particular, can address the major components of the RFP.
Sure, all right.
That's it. In other words, don't tell us what we already know about you. Tell us what in particular about your approach, your team.
I can go with that.
That's fine.
Okay? Good. Connected.
I particularly like to have them give what their approach is going to be, maybe more than how each member of the team is going to do it, because I think there could be different approaches, and I'd really like to see how they discuss that.
Well, the approaches are going to be no better, no worse than the team member.
Yeah.
And it's the people that really, and the talent, that this is very, people intensive.
So I had another suggestion that we go ahead and discuss the reference questions as well on the 27th, because if we're having the interviews the next day on the 28th, assuming everything goes well, we
Yep.
interview
Right.
all
Good
three.
question. Yeah, good point.
We deliberate,
Yeah.
we have our candidate, then come Thursday, making those phone calls.
Do we have the reference questions from last time, Mary? Because I think it'd be probably very similar.
I'll find some standard ones, yeah.
Okay.
And so as we come up with these questions, do we email them to you to make copies for everybody? Is
These
that-
would be the questions for the,
For the interview and any reference questions that we might recommend as well.
okay, remember that the reference questions are to some extent particularized because of the nature of the individual, the responses that you're going to get from folks about a particular vendor leads to other questions, could lead to other questions that are not necessarily on a list.
Right.
What did you mean by that?
Right.
Right, but you can
but
also
yeah,
do that type of follow-up questions in the interviews when they're in front of us.
So in other words, you're saying having the references done before we get to the interview?
No,
No, okay.
no.
Yeah,
just that-
as far as the references go, I'd be happy to have the chair and Myron work up a suggestion and float it by us and see what you intend to, whoever's gonna make those. I mean, rather than try to think up.
Yeah, I'm
the
not trying
reference.
to, yeah, it's more to me, it's not so much
If
what I
you're
say.
missing something that I would think is obvious, I'll say, hey, how about adding this, you know?
Yeah, I think like 80% of the questions are gonna be, I know you're saying you wanna be able to adapt to the particular
Correct.
questions you have in the proposal, but I think 70-80% of the questions are gonna be pretty much the same.
They're
ilk.
initial questions to get
Right.
you started in the
Right.
conversation.
So,
Okay.
so we'll go off, what we've used before, what Maren has, we've used in the master plan before, or what we had, so some standard ones that she thinks might be appropriate. And then if anybody has any ones that they think would like to add to that, for either all of them or a particular firm, we'll bring them up on that.
Okay, so
27th.
there's two pieces of homework then. You've got questions for the vendors themselves and questions that you'd like to see checked out during reference checks.
If we want to add anything to the ones that Maren produces, yes.
Yeah,
There we go.
that'd be great.
Like that. Good.
Mr. Chair, I think we have an audience member who has a comment.
No, I'm good.
Wait for public input.
I thought you meant
Next item on the
Carolyn.
agenda.
Okay.
Rob's
Any other-
almost
no,
like a team member
yeah,
here.
Please,
I'm fine.
no comment?
Well, I just have Rob Houston, 20 Meeting House Road.
Thank you.
I'm not sure Anna's question got answered, and that was a process question. And that is, you float those questions through Maren, who then,
Oh, I'm sorry, she nodded yes.
got it, I missed the nod. Since I'm gonna be home when that question gets asked again, I just wanted to make sure I knew what it was.
Okay. We got
Looks
that.
like we've done our business. Can I move we adjourn?
Not quite,
Not quite.
not quite. Sorry.
I like your instincts, Jonathan, I'm with
We
you.
had a meeting.
All right. I have to be curious, we're now at the section of public, and are there any further comments you'd like to make about anything having to do with consultant interviews?
Not on that topic, no.
All right, okay. Public input. Anyone, this is the chance.
You just came to watch? Wow.
Okay,
case I came up with a question.
okay.
Sometimes it's entertaining, you know.
If we have a few minutes, I believe that you have made some progress in producing a draft.
Yeah.
For advisory.
I don't know if I can share it here today. All right, so I do have copies,
We can't decide anything, but you can share it.
Right.
because it wasn't on the agenda, right?
That's the topic.
Okay. So, based upon my meeting with the planning board, it was recommended that I come up with a charter or charge for the Transportation Advisory Council idea, which I have floated.
Yep.
So, Maren was gracious enough to give me something to start off, because I have no idea what a charge looked like. And I worked off she gave me the Master Plan Implementation Committee's charge. And so, it's very similar to what I had said in my memo before, but in the context, in the format more of this quote charge. So I understand what the process is that I have to get on the agenda for the selectmen, and I'd probably give them my dog and pony show that I did before with the other groups, and then give them this as a potential charge for them to comment on. And this is based upon the feedback I heard about, frequency of meeting and the types of boards that we think we'd want to have in there. And so it definitely open for comment or for suggestions, but just to put something out there. So I would appreciate if anybody had any comments on it, I would further refine this before I try to get on the selectmen's agenda.
Initial thought, just on the membership committee, one is a personal preference, is one in the second factor on the same point is just a reflection of reality here. I always prefer to see members of committees or the public on the committee, and that staff be, de facto advisory capacity to the committee, and that would actually reflect, say, on your lineup of this committee, Director of Public Works and the town administrator or her assistant. Those folks would be involved from our perspective anyway, but we have, as a board goal, transportation topics, and we have 2 selectmen assigned to it. So if we've already got 2 selectmen who are already working with the Department of Transportation, say, for instance, at the meeting we have tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock at the high school to go over issues regarding the 110 intersection with the high school entrance, makes sense to have a member of the board who's actually on the transportation topics, and knowing that the staff members would be involved anyway, as staff members.
Okay. So,
So your point is there should be a selectman on this committee?
Yeah, and I would say, I wouldn't care if it was, I would think it should be a selectman as opposed to the town administrator or his or her assistant, and for that matter, the public works director. Those people, employees of the town, are going to be involved as they are necessary and should be involved. But if it comes down to voting on things, our director of public works works for our town administrator. Does he vote independent of our town administrator? I don't know. He also lives in Greenfield. Do you want somebody who lives in Greenfield voting on, we're going to get his input, we're going to, value it. I'm just
yeah,
thinking.
and that's
I
part of
agree.
my, even if I'm not knowing how this all works, because I know a lot of the money that we get for transportation is in the coffers of the Public Works Department.
Right.
And so the points that I've heard from talking with some of the other committees is having their opinion. One of the big points of this whole thing is having a place at the table where they hear.
Definitely should be there, and
They
will be
hear-
there, and I'm not opposed to seeing that in there, but as far as if there's like voting things, I think that should be residents of the town in whatever capacity they're there as,
So not be on the board per se, but be advisory or.
yeah,
or
de
something like
facto,
that.
non-voting advisory,
De
whatever.
facto, whatever,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah. I agree with Paul. I think that's the general principle that we've had.
Yeah,
Yeah, we've got to have that wording somewhere else. So
Right.
we can't find the right.
yeah. Well, I mean, we've encountered this sort of issue before, and, it's not excluding these people, it's just making sure the roles are defined a little differently.
So if you can give me some wording as to how to put those in context, I would appreciate it, because I don't want to step on anybody's toes.
Beyond that, I appreciate the work you put into this, and it's needed.
Yeah.
And others are invited to chime in on this one, including putting it down. But the thing that, for me, not necessarily missing, maybe I'm missing the spirit of what you're trying to do, Gary, but for me, the mission of this seems to be a discussion group, a place for different opinions to be gathered and hopefully, as it were, what you're really looking for is for something of influence, something of import to come out of this committee. And I think one of the ways that may be possible is to ask the committee, ask this group, to take responsibility for collecting and frankly pursuing grant and other financial resources that would be available to achieve the town's interests and goals in transportation. In other words, a place in which all the different opportunities to get information and funds be collected, as it were, as part of the role, instead of having all this in silos. Because at the moment, this is a discussion group.
But there also, it is a discussion group, it is a council, it is advisory. I mean, it's in the title, it's an advisory, with the idea that we're getting different perspectives all at the table to help establish what we think maybe the transportation goals and funding priorities, that comes with the money, where we're going to invest in. We're not going to just invest in more roads, we're going to invest in sidewalks, we're going to invest in other things. And I think the funding stream could be diverse. I mean, I think the planning board currently has funding streams coming from development for sidewalk funds and other types of things. And doesn't preclude that, I don't think it precludes that, it definitely could include grants and stuff like that, but I need to get into that kind of, specificity at this time.
I don't see my argument simply is this, and this is what you want to do. To me, this committee is a discussion group, a gathering of information, and
But it helps set priorities. Look, we have, obviously, we do transportation things, and we enact transportation policy right now, but that, as someone who's involved in that, I welcome this as a way of kind of capturing in an umbrella
Sure,
things that
yeah,
don't always fall in that. Just having, we deal almost exclusively with the Director of Public Works, so we see everything that is of importance to him and his daily work. These other things don't necessarily factor in it. Nobody is
Yeah.
excluding them, but this process would guarantee that those other interests are at the table, and I welcome that. I think that's good.
No, I'm not against having them at the table, it's how it gets.
But I think when you, I don't want to think, I think discussion ought not to be a pejorative.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
good. And beyond that, what would you want? I mean, or, helping to set priorities and, if they can identify funding sources or opportunities, sure. But some of that already is other people's well-paid job descriptions, to do those very things.
Yeah, but it's funny how it doesn't come out.
But it does.
It leaks out slowly. and-
Oh, well, I don't know. I think that happens a little bit more professionally than you might be aware of. But look, I'm not going to dissuade this group from doing it, but to suggest that it's not already happening, I don't think that's accurate.
If it's not in their charge to say they have to, you have to actively seek out funds, does it mean that they can't do that?
I think unless you articulate it, it's not going to happen. It's going to still say siloed.
I'm
And
not
there's nothing wrong
sure,
with it.
I
I'm
don't
not
think
sure that
way.
this kind of a group should be doing that. I mean, it seems to me this group is coordinating the work of all kinds of, lots of other people who have as one of, many of, most of which, or many of which anyway, have as goals seeking funds, and this group is sort of to make sure that everybody knows what they're doing and what each
Right.
group
Yeah,
is
I mean,
doing.
I wouldn't
And,
encourage this group to go pursue grants and things like
No, I
that.
didn't ask anyone to
All
pursue
right,
grant.
or-
It's basically collect the information and make it available, and basically make it part of their mission to do that gathering.
And more, gather that information and even more stronger than that, make recommendations.
Yeah,
Here's-
exactly.
There you
And
go.
I think it would give.
And monitor the progress of things that, some of the oversight. I think
That's it, yeah.
that's sometimes where the biggest problem lies, and you can sit down and have a great meeting to decide to pursue something, and then after everybody disperses,
Yeah.
the follow-through is not, if it doesn't land in somebody's lap, obviously, then it doesn't always happen.
Well, to the reason for setting this up, Gary, I think being able to gather all the various master plan recommendations under one roof, so to speak, and try to ensure that they're getting the attention is really critical. One thought I had is having an annual report, is that enough, is that timely enough? So whether at the end of the quarterly meeting or even every 6 months instead, being able to update the Board of Selectmen, Planning Board, Mpic, whichever groups are needing that information to advance the decisions, do you think that would maybe be able to, again, keep,
Like a
Tack.
quarterly status report.
Right, a quarterly status
and-
report.
And annual
I mean,
report.
See,
you're in the
actually,
selectmen.
I would-
How often do you think?
is,
I would
I
argue
think-
against reporting just for reporting. I would say if you're
Move slowly
looking
this
to
time,
recommend
Yeah.
to provide input to the annual budget process, or to the Board of Selectmen when they set their goals.
That's
What
what
is
I
the
was
recommendation?
tying this to the annual goals and budgets is what I was thinking.
That's probably the most important factor, but I'll tell you, if it is part of the mission to have a quarterly report and it gets generated, well, that once again is it forces the topics back on the plate. We'll receive the report, and whoever else will receive the report, and then we have to say, oh yeah, that this one is in limbo. We need to follow up on that,
Still out there.
or I don't know. That doesn't have to be a huge process. But if there's going to be a quarterly meeting, then the minutes of that meeting are essentially the
Right,
report
that's-
anyway.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And you're right, Martin, not to duplicate efforts, but if you're already having a meeting and someone's taking notes and accumulating those for an eventual annual report, it's just documenting that for more eyes to see, yeah. So that was my 2 cents.
It's fine. I mean, I think it's important to have some kind of mark on the wall that says this is gonna be some product that's produced and that's the annual. I don't think it precludes them, if there's an issue and the group wants to brief the Board of Selectmen or something, as some new developments coming in or something like that, and they wanna have a discussion, by all means, I think it doesn't restrict them from not doing that.
No, but even just if you met quarterly and the minutes get turned into a report that's just shared to the, selectmen, planning board, whoever else is involved, then that keeps it on people's radar screen without, hopefully, any onerous additional work on anybody's part.
So I consciously didn't include the Board of Selectmen simply because it seems like those guys get tacked with being on a lot of different committees as it is.
Well, it may end up
And-
being a designee, but I think to have this operating on its own and then have the selectmen also have two members appointed to be in charge of transportation issues.
That's fine.
You're asking for disconnect, and I would just say try to incorporate that. What you'll probably find out is, one or two of the, our current designated members would probably just meld right into this, and that would be a
Okay.
way of them doing their efforts. I'm not one of them, so it's no additional work for me.
Volunteered somebody.
Yeah, right.
Are there any other comments on I think, the representation?
I think it looks good, yeah.
No, it looks good to me, Gary. I think you've done a good job here.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Okay, so if there's no further minutes? No minutes? Okay. We're waiting for production here.
Yes.
Okay. Are there any topics that anyone would like to bring up at this point?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I
got one.
Yeah, sure.
Please.
Yeah, good news. I think everybody knows from when we left the presentation made at the selectmen's meeting, which if you were either there or you heard about it, or I might have been updated at the last meeting, can't remember which happened last. We don't yet have those working estimate numbers, which is our next hopeful deliverable from our consultants, but what we do have had is the initial meetings with both of the property owners that we identified as, sites for consideration because they already have active treatment plants going, and that's, it's no secret, it was said publicly, the IBM and the Sand Park properties. And both, without going too far on it, both of the meetings went very well initially, so that's hopeful. The meetings have taken place, and the initial discussions are hopeful, so that's good.
Fantastic. Excellent.
There was some, I've been on the loop on this, there's no evaluation as to where it could go also on town land, right? The high school
Yeah,
was one.
and there may be multiple treatment pieces to it, and then the discharge would be in, likely one location, because you want to, just needs to get back into the aquifer,
Right.
but the treatment could be in more than one location. And it, not to belabor that point, but there's a couple of reasons why we might want it to be in more than one location.
Yeah, I understand why.
All right, if we're finished with that one, is, okay?
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for that update, that's good news.
Yeah.
One piece of, quote, semi-new business is that with the finishing of the subcommittee's work on screening proposals, I think it's time to dissolve, as they say, sunset that committee. And so I move that the committee as a whole thank the, and shall we say, dismiss and dissolve the subcommittee for screening. Do I hear a motion to that?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's carried, so that committee no longer exists.
Thank you,
Right.
good job, guys.
Is there no further business? I'd like to hear a motion
I
for...
think this means it's time for us to go home. Myron's drive has arrived.
Sit down and be
Move
quiet.
adjourned.
There's a motion to adjourn. Second?
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you very much for coming.
Good meeting.
For the work.
See what impact you have.